The morning sun was streaming through my kitchen window when I noticed something that made my heart sink. My front yard looked absolutely terrible. Weeds sprouting everywhere, the hedge growing wild and unkempt. And the flower beds I'd worked so hard to establish last spring were now completely overrun. As I stood there sipping my coffee, I couldn't understand why Miguel, my landscaper of 3 years, hadn't shown up for his scheduled maintenance in over 2 weeks. I'm the type of person who takes pride in my home's appearance. At 62, I've learned that a well-maintained yard isn't just about curb appeal. It's about self-respect and showing your neighbors that you care about the community we all share. But looking at my property that Tuesday morning, I felt embarrassed and confused. Miguel had always been so reliable, so professional. We'd developed a wonderful working relationship, and I always paid him promptly, sometimes even adding a little extra during the holidays. Before I share this shocking experience, please show your support with a like and subscribe. Comment your location below. My name is Margaret Webb. I'm 62 years old, and I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood where everyone pretty much keeps to themselves. Well, everyone except my next-door neighbor, Patricia Hendricks. Patricia moved in about 2 years ago after her divorce, and from day one, she's made it clear that she has very strong opinions about how everyone else should live their lives. She's the type of woman who measures her grass with a ruler and comments loudly about other people's mail delivery schedules. I've always tried to be cordial, but there's something about Patricia that puts me on edge. Maybe it's the way she watches everything from her front window, or how she always seems to know everyone else's business before they do. What really bothered me that morning wasn't just the state of my yard, but the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. Miguel wasn't the type to just disappear without explanation. He took pride in his work, and we'd discussed several upcoming projects for the fall season. The whole situation felt wrong, and I couldn't shake the worry that was building in my chest. I decided to call my daughter, Sarah Webb, who lives about 20 minutes away with her family. Sarah has always been my voice of reason. She's 34, works in marketing, and has this wonderful ability to see situations clearly without getting emotional. When I explained what was happening, she immediately offered to help investigate. "Mom, that doesn't sound like Miguel at all," Sarah said when she came over that afternoon. "Remember when he worked through that storm last month to make sure your drainage was fixed before the heavy rains? Something's definitely off here." Sarah suggested we reach out to Linda Morrison, my friend from the community center where I volunteer twice a week. Linda has lived in this neighborhood for 15 years and knows everyone. All the service providers, the gossip, the neighborhood dynamics. If anyone would know what happened to Miguel or have insight into local contractor issues, it would be Linda. When Linda came over that evening, she had this uncomfortable expression on her face that immediately put me on alert. We've been friends for 5 years, ever since we started working together on the annual charity drive, and I could tell she was holding back information. "Margaret, I wasn't sure if I should say anything," Linda began, settling into my living room chair with obvious reluctance. "But I think you need to know what I heard at the grocery store yesterday." My stomach clenched. In small communities like ours, grocery store conversations can make or break reputations. I watched Linda's face carefully, trying to read her expression as she gathered her thoughts. "I overheard Patricia talking to someone on her phone in the produce section," Linda continued, her voice dropping lower. "She was saying something about your bills and how she'd warned Miguel about working for people who don't pay their contractors." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my face flush with anger and embarrassment simultaneously. The idea that Patricia would interfere with my business relationships was shocking enough, but to spread lies about my financial responsibility felt like a personal attack on my character. Sarah immediately stood up, her protective instincts kicking in. Are you absolutely sure that's what you heard, Linda? I'm positive, Linda replied sadly. And Margaret, there's more. Patricia apparently told Miguel that other neighbors had complained about your payment history with service providers. I sat there in stunned silence, my mind racing through every interaction I'd had with Patricia over the past 2 years. Had I somehow offended her without realizing it? Was this revenge for something I'd done unknowingly? The accusations were completely false. I've always paid my bills on time, and I have the bank statements and receipts to prove it. What made this betrayal even more painful was the realization that Patricia had deliberately sabotaged my relationship with Miguel, someone I trusted and respected. She'd used lies to damage both my reputation and my ability to maintain my property, knowing full well how much pride I take in my home's appearance. As the three of us sat in my living room that evening, trying to process this information, I felt a mixture of rage and determination building inside me. This wasn't just about landscaping anymore. This was about my integrity, my reputation in the community, and my right to live peacefully without interference from malicious neighbors. And that's when the pattern snapped into place. The weight of Linda's revelations settled over me like a heavy blanket. I found myself replaying every conversation I'd had with Miguel over the past few months, searching for signs that he'd believed Patricia's lies. The way he'd seemed hesitant during our last discussion about the fall cleanup suddenly made perfect sense. I'd attributed his reluctance to being busy with other clients, but now I understood the real reason. Sarah moved from her chair to sit beside me on the couch, her presence offering comfort even as my mind churned with anger. Mom, we need to figure out how to handle this. Patricia can't be allowed to keep spreading these lies about you. But why would she do this? I asked, more to myself than to anyone else. What could I have possibly done to make her want to sabotage my relationships with service providers? Linda shifted uncomfortably in her chair, and I noticed she was avoiding direct eye contact. Something in her body language made me pause, a nagging feeling that there was still more to this story than what she'd already shared. Linda, I said carefully, is there something else you haven't told me yet? She sighed deeply, and I could see the internal struggle playing out across her face. After a long moment, she looked directly at me with an expression of reluctant determination. Margaret, I need to be completely honest with you about what I witnessed at the grocery store. When Patricia was on that phone call, she wasn't just talking about Miguel. She mentioned other service providers too. My heart sank even further. The scope of Patricia's interference was apparently broader than I'd initially realized, and the implications were staggering. If she'd been systematically contacting various contractors and service people in our area, the damage to my reputation could be extensive. Sarah's jaw tightened visibly, and I could see the protective anger building in her eyes. What exactly did she say about other providers? She mentioned something about warning the lawn care company that comes through the neighborhood, and I think she said something about a cleaning service too, Linda replied quietly. Margaret, I'm so sorry. I should have confronted her right there in the store, but I was so shocked that I just stood there listening. The full magnitude of Patricia's campaign against me was becoming clear, and I felt a mixture of devastation and fury coursing through me. This wasn't just a single incident of gossip or a misunderstanding that had gotten out of hand. This was a deliberate, sustained effort to undermine my standing in the community. I stood up abruptly, needing to move as the emotions threatened to overwhelm me. Walking to the window that faced Patricia's house, I stared across the yard that separated our properties. Her living room lights were on, and I could see her moving around inside, probably completely unaware that her actions had been discovered. I need to understand her motivation, I said, still looking toward her house. People don't usually go to these lengths without a reason, even if that reason is completely irrational. Sarah joined me at the window, and I felt her hand on my shoulder. Maybe she's jealous of how well-maintained your property always looks. Or maybe she's just one of those people who creates drama because she's unhappy with her own life. Linda cleared her throat softly from behind us. Actually, Margaret, I think I might know what triggered this behavior from Patricia. Both Sarah and I turned to face her immediately. The way Linda's voice had changed, taking on an even more serious tone, made it clear that we were about to hear something significant. Remember the neighborhood association meeting 3 months ago? The one where we discussed the new landscaping guidelines for common areas? I nodded, recalling the lengthy discussion about maintaining property values and aesthetic standards. It had been a fairly routine meeting, or so I'd thought at the time. Well, after the official meeting ended, Patricia approached several of us about organizing a sort of informal committee to monitor compliance with the guidelines. She specifically suggested that we should keep track of which neighbors were maintaining their properties properly and which ones might need gentle reminders. The pieces were starting to come together in my mind, forming a picture that made me feel sick to my stomach. And what happened with that suggestion? Most of us thought it was unnecessary and potentially intrusive, Linda continued. I remember you specifically saying that neighbors should be trusted to handle their own property maintenance without supervision from others. Now I remembered that conversation more clearly. Patricia had seemed enthusiastic about the idea of monitoring compliance, and when several of us had expressed reservations about such an approach, she'd appeared genuinely disappointed and somewhat defensive. So she's been holding a grudge about that for 3 months? Sarah asked incredulously. It gets worse, Linda said, her voice barely above a whisper. After you and the others left that night, Patricia made some comments about people who think they're too good to participate in community oversight. She seemed to take the rejection of her idea as a personal insult. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Patricia's campaign of lies and interference stemmed from something as trivial as a disagreement about neighborhood politics. The pettiness of it was almost more shocking than the malicious behavior itself. But as Linda continued speaking, I realized we still hadn't uncovered the full extent of what Patricia had been doing behind my back, and what I was about to learn would change everything about how I needed to respond to this situation. I watched Linda's face carefully as she glanced around Sarah's living room, as if checking to make sure we were truly alone. The afternoon light streaming through the windows had shifted, casting longer shadows across the hardwood floor, and I found myself gripping my coffee cup tighter as I prepared for whatever she was about to reveal. Margaret, I need to tell you something that's going to be difficult to hear, Linda said, settling deeper into the armchair across from us. After I witnessed that conversation between Patricia and your landscaper, I started paying more attention to her behavior around the neighborhood. Sarah reached over and placed her hand on my arm, a gesture that somehow made me feel both comforted and more anxious at the same time. The warmth of her touch was reassuring, but the fact that she felt I needed reassuring told me we were heading into uncomfortable territory. What kind of behavior? I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Linda took a deep breath, her usual composed demeanor showing cracks of genuine concern. She's been approaching other service providers too, Margaret. I've seen her talking to the postal worker. And last week, I watched her have what looked like a very intense conversation with the woman who delivers groceries for that online service you use. The room seemed to grow smaller around me. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, the same sensation I'd experienced when dealing with difficult situations at work before I retired. But this was different because it was happening in my own neighborhood, in the space where I was supposed to feel safe and at home. The grocery delivery person? Sarah's voice carried a sharp edge that I rarely heard from her. That's not just petty neighborhood drama anymore. That's interfering with basic necessities. I tried to process what Linda was telling us while simultaneously fighting off a wave of anger that felt almost overwhelming. Patricia wasn't just spreading lies about my financial reliability. She was systematically trying to isolate me from essential services. The calculated nature of her campaign was becoming clearer, and it was far more extensive than I'd initially realized. "There's more," Linda continued, and I noticed how she kept glancing at me as if gauging whether I could handle additional revelations. "Yesterday morning, I was getting my mail when I overheard Patricia talking to Tom Richardson from 2 streets over. You know Tom, he works for the city's code enforcement department." My stomach dropped. Tom Richardson and I had always had friendly conversations when we'd run into each other at neighborhood events. He was a reasonable man who took his job seriously, but wasn't known for being overly aggressive about minor violations. The thought of Patricia involving him in her vendetta felt like a significant escalation. "What exactly did she tell him?" I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded despite the turmoil I was feeling inside. Linda hesitated, and in that pause, I could see her struggling with whether to continue. The expression on her face reminded me of how doctors look right before they deliver bad news. That careful combination of sympathy and professional determination to share necessary but painful information. She told him that several neighbors had been complaining about your property maintenance, specifically about your lawn being neglected and some supposed issues with your garbage bins being left out too long. She suggested that someone should do a formal inspection to make sure you were in compliance with city ordinances. Sarah stood up abruptly, her movement so sudden that it startled both Linda and me. She began pacing across the living room, her footsteps creating a rhythmic sound against the floor that somehow matched the rapid beating of my heart. "This has gone way beyond neighborhood gossip," Sarah said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "She's trying to get city officials involved based on completely fabricated complaints. Margaret, your lawn is immaculate and you're the most conscientious person I know about following every single rule and regulation." I appreciated Sarah's defense of me, but I was still trying to wrap my mind around the scope of Patricia's campaign. It wasn't just about preventing me from hiring a landscaper anymore. She was actively trying to create problems for me with municipal authorities. The deliberate, methodical nature of her approach was almost more disturbing than the lies themselves. "Linda, did Tom seem to believe what she was telling him?" I asked, dreading the answer but needing to know what I might be facing. "That's the thing," Linda replied, and for the first time since she'd started sharing these revelations, her expression showed a hint of something that might have been relief. Tom looked skeptical throughout their entire conversation. I could see him glancing toward your street with a confused expression, like he was trying to reconcile what Patricia was saying with what he knew about your property. This small piece of potentially good news didn't do much to alleviate my growing sense of unease. Even if Tom didn't immediately believe Patricia's claims, the fact remained that she had planted seeds of doubt with someone who had the authority to create real problems for me. And if she was willing to involve city officials, what other lines was she prepared to cross? Sarah stopped pacing and turned to face both Linda and me. "We need to find out exactly how many people she's approached and what she's told each of them. This isn't something Margaret can ignore anymore and hope it goes away." I nodded, knowing Sarah was right but feeling overwhelmed by the magnitude of what that investigation might reveal. The comfortable predictability of my retirement life was being systematically dismantled by someone I'd barely had any meaningful interactions with over the past several years. But as I sat there in Sarah's living room, surrounded by the evidence of Patricia's escalating campaign against me, I realized that Linda's revelations had only scratched the surface. The look in her eyes suggested she was still holding back something significant, something that would transform this situation from a neighborhood dispute into something far more serious and potentially dangerous. "Linda," I said carefully, studying her face, "what else haven't you told us?" She shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her fingers worrying at the hem of her sweater. The afternoon light streaming through Sarah's windows seemed to highlight every line of tension in Linda's expression, and I found myself bracing for whatever bombshell she was about to drop. "There's something else Patricia said to Tom that I wasn't sure I should mention," Linda began, her voice barely above a whisper. "She told him that she's been keeping detailed records of what she calls suspicious activity at your house, Margaret. She claimed you've been having people over at all hours, that there's been unusual traffic, and that she's documented it all with dates and times." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my chest tighten as the implications sank in. Patricia wasn't just spreading casual lies anymore. She was constructing an elaborate fiction designed to paint me as some kind of neighborhood menace. The methodical nature of her deception was terrifying in its thoroughness. "Suspicious activity?" Sarah's voice cracked with indignation. "Margaret barely has anyone over except us, and when she does, it's for book club or bridge games with women from church. What could possibly be suspicious about that?" I found myself mentally reviewing my recent activities, trying to see them through Patricia's twisted lens. The book club meetings that ran until 9 o'clock on Thursday evenings. The bridge games that sometimes involved 4 or 5 cars in my driveway. The grocery delivery service I'd started using when my arthritis flared up. Even my weekly cleaning service could be misconstrued if someone was determined to find fault. The realization that I was second-guessing my own perfectly normal activities made me feel violated in a way I hadn't experienced before. Patricia had managed to make me question the legitimacy of my own life, and that awareness filled me with a cold fury that surprised me with its intensity. "What kind of records could she possibly have?" I asked, though part of me dreaded the answer. Linda looked miserable as she continued. "She told Tom she has a notebook where she writes down every time someone comes to your house, how long they stay, and what time they leave. She said she's been doing it for months because she was concerned about the neighborhood's safety and property values." The image of Patricia lurking behind her curtains, watching my house like some deranged surveillance officer, made my skin crawl. I thought about all the times I'd felt like I was being watched when I was in my own yard, the uncomfortable prickle between my shoulder blades that I'd dismissed as paranoia. Apparently, my instincts had been more accurate than I'd realized. Sarah had gone very still, which I recognized as a dangerous sign. When Sarah got quiet, it usually meant she was planning something, and given her protective nature when it came to family, that something was likely to be decisive and possibly confrontational. "She's stalking you," Sarah said flatly. "That's what this is. She's been stalking you and creating a fictional narrative about your life to justify her obsession." The word stalking hung in the air between us, and I felt something shift inside me. Until that moment, I'd been thinking of Patricia's behavior as the actions of a difficult neighbor, someone who was petty and vindictive but ultimately harmless. But stalking implied a level of fixation and potential danger that transformed the entire situation. I found myself thinking about my daily routines, wondering how much Patricia knew about my comings and goings. Did she know what time I usually left for the grocery store? Had she noticed the days when I stayed home because I wasn't feeling well? The thought of being so thoroughly observed without my knowledge made me feel exposed and vulnerable in my own home. "Linda, when Patricia was talking to Tom, did she show him this notebook?" I asked, hoping the answer would be no but suspecting otherwise. "She had it with her," Linda confirmed, crushing my hopes. A small spiral notebook that she kept consulting while she was talking. She didn't show Tom the actual pages, but she kept referencing specific dates and times. She seemed very proud of how thorough she'd been. The methodical nature of Patricia's record-keeping suggested a level of premeditation that went far beyond simple neighborly complaints. This wasn't someone who had suddenly decided she didn't like me. This was someone who had been building a case against me for months, collecting what she considered evidence to support whatever narrative she was trying to construct. I thought about my late husband and how he would have handled this situation. He'd always been more confrontational than I was, more willing to address problems head-on rather than hoping they would resolve themselves. For the first time since this whole mess started, I found myself wishing I could channel some of his directness. But even as I sat there feeling intimidated and violated, I realized that something fundamental had changed in how I was processing this situation. The revelation about Patricia's notebook had crossed a line that transformed my confusion and hurt into something harder and more focused. I wasn't just dealing with a difficult neighbor anymore. I was dealing with someone whose behavior had escalated to a level that couldn't be ignored or explained away. Sarah must have sensed the change in my mood because she leaned forward and studied my face carefully. "Margaret, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," I said slowly, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice, "that it's time I stopped being reactive and started being proactive about this situation. Patricia has been controlling this entire narrative because I didn't know what she was doing. But now I do know, and that changes everything." Linda looked relieved that I wasn't falling apart, but I could see worry in her eyes too. "What does that mean, exactly?" Before I could answer, Sarah's phone rang from the kitchen counter where she'd left it. The sound made all three of us jump, our nerves clearly more frayed than any of us had wanted to admit. Sarah went to check the caller ID, and when she returned to the living room, her face was pale. "It's Patricia," she said, holding up the phone so we could see the name on the display. "She's calling me." The three of us stared at Sarah's phone as it continued to ring, Patricia's name glowing on the screen like an accusation. My heart started racing again, but this time it wasn't just from anxiety. There was something almost surreal about the timing of this call, coming right after we'd been discussing Patricia's systematic campaign against me. "Don't answer it," I said quickly, then immediately questioned my own instinct. "Actually, maybe you should. We might learn something." Sarah looked uncertain, her thumb hovering over the phone. "What if she's calling to complain about you to me too? Or what if she saw Linda coming over here and wants to know what we're talking about?" The thought sent a chill through me. Had Patricia been watching my house, noting who came and went? Given what we'd just learned about her record-keeping habits, it didn't seem far-fetched. I found myself glancing toward the front window, even though the blinds were closed. "Let it go to voicemail," Linda suggested. "That way we can hear what she has to say without having to respond in the moment." The ringing stopped, and we all held our breath, waiting to see if Patricia would leave a message. The silence that followed felt heavy with possibility. I realized I was gripping the arm of my chair so tightly that my knuckles had gone white. "I keep thinking about that notebook," I said, trying to process what it meant for my situation. What could she possibly have been writing down about me? I barely interact with her. I wave when I see her. I keep my property neat. I don't have loud parties or play music late at night. Sarah sat back down, still holding her phone. "That's exactly what makes this so strange, Mom. If you were actually a problem neighbor, her complaints would at least make sense, even if they were exaggerated. But from what I can see, You're probably one of the most considerate people on the street. Maybe that's part of the problem, Linda said thoughtfully. Some people create drama because they need it. If there isn't any real conflict in their lives, they'll manufacture it. I thought about my interactions with Patricia over the past year, trying to remember anything that might have triggered her animosity. There had been the time when my newspaper delivery got mixed up with hers, and I'd walked over to exchange them. She'd seemed annoyed that I'd knocked on her door, even though it was the middle of the afternoon. And there was the incident with the garbage truck, where the driver had accidentally grabbed her bin instead of mine. She'd marched over to inform me that my bin was blocking the truck's access to hers, even though they were several feet apart. At the time, I'd chalked these interactions up to general crankiness or bad days. Everyone had them. But now, I was starting to see a pattern of someone who was actively looking for reasons to be upset with me. What bothers me most, I said, is how helpless this makes me feel. She's out there telling people things about me that aren't true, and I don't even know what she's saying or who she's saying it to. How do you defend yourself against accusations you haven't heard? Sarah's phone chimed with a voicemail notification, and we all turned toward the sound like it was a fire alarm. She looked at me questioningly. "Play it," I said, surprised by how firm my voice sounded. "I need to know what we're dealing with." Sarah put the phone on speaker and pressed play. Patricia's voice filled my living room, and I was struck by how different she sounded than I remembered. There was an edge to her tone that I'd never noticed before, or maybe I'd just never been paying close enough attention. "Sarah, dear, this is Patricia from next door to your mother. I hope you don't mind me calling, but I got your number from the neighborhood directory. I wanted to reach out because I'm concerned about Margaret, and I thought, as her daughter, you should know what's been going on." My stomach dropped as Patricia's voice continued, syrupy sweet, but with that sharp undertone I was now recognizing. "I've been watching Margaret's behavior lately, and I'm quite worried about her mental state. She's been doing some very concerning things that I think you should be aware of. Just yesterday, I caught her staring at my house for almost 20 minutes from her front window. When I waved at her, she quickly ducked away like she was spying on me. I felt my face flush hot. I was waiting for a delivery, I said to the phone, even though I knew Patricia couldn't hear me. The driver said he'd be there between 2 and 4, and I was watching for the truck. Sarah held up her hand, signaling me to wait as Patricia's voice continued. And there's been some troubling financial issues. I've heard from several service people in the neighborhood that she's been having trouble paying her bills. Her landscaper, Miguel, mentioned to me that she owes him quite a bit of money and has been avoiding his calls. I felt so bad for the poor man. "That's a complete lie," I whispered, but Linda shook her head, pointing at the phone. "I know this must be difficult to hear, dear, but I thought you should know that your mother might need some help managing her affairs. Perhaps it's time to consider whether she should still be living alone. I've seen this happen with other elderly neighbors, and it's always better to intervene early before things get worse." The voicemail continued for another minute, with Patricia painting an increasingly disturbing picture of me as someone who is confused, financially irresponsible, and possibly developing dementia. By the time her message ended with a request for Sarah to call her back so they could discuss Margaret's situation, I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. The living room fell silent except for the sound of my own breathing, which seemed unnaturally loud. Sarah stared at her phone like it might bite her, while Linda sat forward in her chair, her expression shifting from shock to anger. "She called you elderly," Linda said finally. "You're 58 years old. That's what bothers you most about that message?" Sarah asked, though I could tell she was trying to lighten the moment. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at Patricia's house. Her car was in the driveway, and I could see lights on in what I assumed was her kitchen. She was probably in there right now, maybe making more calls, spreading more lies about me to other neighbors. "She's trying to isolate me," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. Inside, I felt anything but calm. "Think about it. She tells Miguel I don't pay my bills, so he stops working for me. She calls Sarah to plant seeds of doubt about my mental capacity. She's systematically cutting off my support system and making people question my reliability." "But why?" Sarah asked. "What could she possibly gain from doing this to you?" I turned back to face them, and something clicked into place in my mind. "Control," I said. "She wants to be the authority figure in this neighborhood. If I'm unreliable, if I'm having mental or financial problems, then people will turn to her instead of me for information or help." Linda nodded slowly. "There was a woman like this in my old neighborhood. She appointed herself the unofficial neighborhood watch coordinator, but really, she just wanted to know everyone's business and have power over the social dynamics of the street." "The newspaper mix-up," I said, pieces falling together. "She was annoyed because I handled it myself instead of asking for her help. And when the garbage truck made that mistake, she came over not because she was actually upset about the bins, but because she wanted to establish herself as someone who would call out problems and manage conflicts." Sarah was staring at her phone again. "Mom, she wants me to call her back. She's expecting me to be worried about you, maybe even grateful to her for bringing these concerns to my attention." "And when you don't react the way she expects," Linda added, "she'll probably escalate. People like this don't handle it well when their manipulation doesn't work." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean, escalate?" Linda leaned forward, her fingers drumming against the coffee table in a rhythm that matched my racing heartbeat. The afternoon light streaming through the windows had shifted, casting longer shadows across the room, making everything feel more ominous. "When people like Patricia don't get the reaction they want," Linda said carefully, "they often try harder. More calls to Sarah, maybe reaching out to other neighbors with more elaborate stories. She might even start documenting things that aren't actually problems. Taking photos, making it seem like you're not maintaining your property properly." I sank back into my chair, the weight of the situation settling over me like a heavy blanket. My house suddenly felt less like a sanctuary and more like a fortress under siege. Through the window, I could see Patricia's perfectly manicured lawn, her spotless driveway, her house with its crisp white shutters that never seemed to need repainting. "I keep thinking about that first day she came over," I said, running my hands through my hair. "The way she looked around my entryway, how she commented on my garden being interesting. I thought she was just being polite, maybe a little awkward. But she was cataloging, wasn't she? Looking for things to use later?" Sarah had been quiet, staring at her phone, but now she looked up with an expression I recognized from her teenage years when she was working through a problem. "Mom, she texted again while we were talking. She says it's urgent that she speak with me about your situation, and that she's concerned about you being alone so much." The irony wasn't lost on me. Patricia was expressing concern about my isolation while actively working to isolate me. I stood up again, needing to move, and walked to the kitchen. The dirty dishes from breakfast sat in the sink, a normal mess of everyday life that suddenly felt like evidence of incompetence under Patricia's scrutiny. "The thing is," I called back to them, "I actually was starting to feel confused and doubtful about myself. When Miguel didn't show up, when those little things kept happening, I started wondering if I was losing track of things. She was getting into my head." Linda appeared in the doorway, her expression fierce. "That's exactly what gaslighting does. It makes you question your own reality, your own memory. You're not losing anything, Margaret. You're dealing with someone who's deliberately trying to make you feel that way. Sarah joined us in the kitchen, her phone clutched in her hand like evidence. Should I call her back? Tell her to stop? No, I said quickly, then paused to think. Actually, maybe, but not to tell her to stop. If we confront her directly, she'll just deny everything and probably get more creative about hiding what she's doing. The kitchen felt too small with all three of us in it, the walls seeming to press closer as we stood there in the fading afternoon light. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of a car driving by. Normal, everyday sounds that felt surreal given the conversation we were having. What if, Sarah said slowly, I call her back and play along? Act like I'm concerned. Get her to tell me more about what she thinks is wrong with you. Maybe she'll reveal more about what she's been doing or planning to do. The suggestion made my stomach clench. The idea of my own daughter having to pretend to doubt my competence, even as a strategy, felt like another violation. But as I looked at Sarah's determined face, I realized she was thinking like the smart, capable woman she'd become, someone who could handle Patricia's manipulation without being swayed by it. That's risky, Linda said. If Patricia thinks she has Sarah as an ally, she might escalate faster, thinking she has backup for whatever she wants to do next. Outside, I heard the familiar sound of Patricia's front door closing. We all froze, listening as her footsteps clicked across her driveway. I moved to the window and saw her walking directly toward my house, her posture confident, purposeful. She's coming over, I whispered, my heart suddenly pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The sound of Patricia's approaching footsteps sent adrenaline shooting through my system. Sarah grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with something between excitement and fear. This is it. This is our chance to see what she's really doing. Maybe we should all go upstairs, Linda suggested, her voice tight with concern. Wait until she leaves. No. The word came out stronger than I felt. I'm done hiding from her. I'm done letting her make me feel like I'm the problem. I moved away from the window, my hands trembling slightly, but my resolve hardening. She's been playing games with my life, making me doubt myself. I want to face this. Sarah still held her phone, and I could see her mind working. Mom, what if I stay hidden in the kitchen? If she says anything about me calling, I can hear how she handles it. See if she lies about our conversation. The doorbell rang, its familiar chime now sounding ominous. We all looked at each other, and I felt something shift in the dynamics between us. This wasn't just about Patricia anymore. This was about my daughter seeing me stand up for myself, about Linda witnessing whether I could handle this confrontation with dignity, about all of us learning something about who we really were under pressure. Okay, I said, smoothing down my shirt and taking a deep breath. Sarah, kitchen. Linda, I'd like you to stay in the living room if that's all right. I don't want to face this alone, but I want to do the talking. Linda nodded, her expression proud and worried at the same time. I'll be right there if you need me. I walked to the front door, my bare feet silent on the hardwood. Through the frosted glass, I could see Patricia's silhouette, perfectly posed as always. When I opened the door, she was wearing her usual smile, but there was something different in her eyes, a sharpness that hadn't been there in our earlier interactions. Margaret, dear, she said, her voice carrying that same saccharine tone that had once seemed neighborly but now felt calculated. I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I've been so worried about you. Worried about me? I kept my voice level, though my heart was hammering. Why's that, Patricia? She glanced past me into the house, and I knew she was looking for signs of Linda's presence, maybe checking to see if I was alone and vulnerable. "Well, I couldn't help but notice that your yard work has been so inconsistent lately, and when I was talking to your daughter earlier, she seemed concerned about some bills and things getting mixed up." The lie came so smoothly, delivered with such apparent concern, that I felt a moment of that old self-doubt creep in. Had Sarah said something I'd missed? But then I remembered Sarah's shocked face when Patricia had called, the way my daughter had immediately wanted to defend me. "That's interesting," I said, not moving aside to invite Patricia in. "Because Sarah seemed pretty surprised by your call. In fact, she's right here if you'd like to clarify what she actually said." For just a moment, Patricia's mask slipped. Her eyes flickered with something cold and calculating before the concerned neighbor expression returned. "Oh, I wouldn't want to bother her. I'm sure she's busy." From the kitchen, I heard the soft sound of Sarah's footsteps, and I knew my daughter was listening to every word. The thought of Sarah witnessing this confrontation both terrified and strengthened me. I wanted her to see that her mother could handle this, could stand up to someone who was deliberately trying to undermine her. "Actually, Patricia," I said, feeling Linda's presence behind me in the living room like a warm anchor, "I've been doing some thinking about the things that have been happening lately. Miguel not showing up, some of the other little problems I've been having, and I'm starting to wonder if there's more going on than I realized." Patricia's smile became more fixed, more artificial. "I'm not sure what you mean, dear. Though I have to say, I've noticed you seem a bit scattered lately. Forgetful. It happens as we get older, doesn't it?" The casual cruelty of it, the way she delivered the insult wrapped in false sympathy, made my anger flare hot and clean. This was exactly what Linda had described. This was gaslighting in real time, and I was watching Patricia do it with the confidence of someone who had done it successfully before. "You know what's interesting?" I said, my voice growing stronger. "I've been keeping very careful track of my bills lately, and they're all paid on time. In fact, I'm wondering if you might know something about why Miguel thought I wasn't paying him?" The question hung in the air between us, and I watched Patricia's face carefully. She was good at this. I had to give her that. Her expression remained concerned, sympathetic, but I caught the tiny tightening around her eyes, the almost imperceptible stiffening of her shoulders. "Oh, Margaret, I really think you should talk to someone about these suspicions you're having. It's not healthy to think people are working against you when they're just trying to help." And there it was, the deflection, the suggestion that my very reasonable questions were signs of paranoia or mental decline. But this time, instead of making me doubt myself, Patricia's response only confirmed what I already knew. "Help," I repeated slowly. "Like when you helped by telling Miguel I don't pay my bills?" Patricia's mask finally cracked completely. Her face went hard, and when she spoke again, her voice had lost all pretense of warmth. "You want to know the truth?" Patricia's voice was sharp now, cutting through the evening air like a blade. "Fine. Yes, I told Miguel you were unreliable, and I'd do it again." The admission hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd been expecting it. Hearing her actually say it, hearing the venom in her voice, made everything crystal clear. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a neighborhood dispute that had gotten out of hand. This was deliberate. "Why?" The word came out smaller than I'd intended, but I pressed on. "Why would you do that to me?" Patricia stepped closer, and I instinctively took a step back. "Because you don't belong here, Margaret. You never have." This is a neighborhood for people who understand standards, who maintain their properties properly, who contribute something meaningful. I maintain my property just fine, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I could hear how defensive they sounded. Do you? Patricia's laugh was cold. Your garden is a mess half the time. Your car is old and ugly sitting in that driveway. And now you're bringing strange women around, having God knows what kind of lifestyle going on in there. The mention of Linda made my blood run cold. I heard a sharp intake of breath from behind me and knew Linda had heard every word. The casual bigotry, the way Patricia had weaponized her suspicions about my personal life, added another layer of cruelty to what was already an unforgivable situation. What I do in my own home is none of your business, I said, my voice stronger now. It is when it affects property values, Patricia shot back. It is when decent families have to live next to whatever circus you're running over here. From somewhere behind me, I heard Sarah's bedroom door open and then quiet footsteps on the stairs. My daughter was coming down, probably unable to stay upstairs while this confrontation happened below. The thought of Sarah hearing Patricia's ugly words made my protective instincts flare. I think you should leave now, I said firmly. Oh, I'm not done yet, Patricia said. Since we're being honest, let me tell you what's really going to happen. Miguel was just the beginning. I've lived in this neighborhood for 15 years, Margaret. I know everyone. The dry cleaner, the grocery delivery services, the postal workers, the other contractors, and I'm very good at conversations. The threat was unmistakable. She wasn't just talking about ruining my relationship with one landscaper. She was talking about systematically isolating me from every service, every connection that made living here possible. You're talking about harassment. Linda's voice came from directly behind me now, calm and steady. What you're describing is a deliberate campaign of harassment. Patricia's gaze shifted to Linda, and her expression became even more unpleasant. And you are? I'm Margaret's friend, Linda said simply. And I'm also someone who understands exactly what kind of person you are. I'm sure you do, Patricia said with a sneer. Birds of a feather, as they say. Mom? Sarah's voice was small and uncertain as she appeared at the bottom of the stairs. What's happening? The sight of my daughter, still in her pajamas, looking confused and a little frightened, broke something loose in my chest. This woman had invaded my home, threatened my livelihood, insulted my friend, and now Sarah was witnessing all of it. The anger I'd been holding back surged forward, clean and powerful. What's happening, Sarah, is that Patricia here has been lying to people about our family, I said, never taking my eyes off Patricia's face. She's been telling our landscaper that we don't pay our bills, trying to make sure he won't work for us anymore. Sarah's eyes widened. Why would you do that? Patricia looked at Sarah with the same cold calculation she'd been directing at me. Sometimes adults have to make difficult decisions to protect their community, sweetie. Don't you dare talk to my daughter, I said, stepping forward. Don't you ever speak to her again. Or what? Patricia challenged. What exactly are you going to do about any of this, Margaret? You think anyone's going to believe your word over mine? You think Miguel's going to choose you over someone who actually has influence in this neighborhood? The confidence in her voice, the absolute certainty that she held all the power, might have intimidated me a week ago. But standing there with Linda's steady presence behind me and Sarah's wide eyes watching, I realized something had fundamentally changed. Actually, Patricia, I think you're wrong about that, I said, and something in my voice made Sarah straighten up with interest. You see, you've made a fundamental miscalculation here. Patricia's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. "Oh, have I? Please, enlighten me." "You assumed I was powerless," I continued, feeling Linda's encouraging presence behind me. "You assumed I would just quietly accept your lies and manipulation. But here's what you didn't count on. I have something you clearly don't." "And what's that supposed to be?" "The truth," I said simply. "And people who actually know me." Patricia laughed, but it sounded forced now. "The truth? Margaret, please. Who's going to believe you over me?" "Miguel will," Sarah said suddenly, stepping closer to me. "Mom always pays him right when he finishes. I've seen her do it like 100 times. She even gives him extra money at Christmas." "A child's word isn't exactly compelling evidence," Patricia said dismissively, but I noticed she'd lost some of her smugness. "You're right," Linda said, moving to stand beside me. "But Miguel's word certainly would be. And you know what's interesting, Patricia? You've been so focused on lying to him about Margaret that you never bothered to find out what he actually thinks of her." "I don't need to find out anything," Patricia snapped. "I told him what he needed to know." "But did you ask him to confirm your lies?" I asked. "Did you actually get him to agree that I don't pay my bills?" For the first time, Patricia hesitated. "I don't need to prove anything to you." "No, you don't," I agreed. "But you might want to prove it to yourself, because here's what I think happened. You told Miguel some story about me, and he probably just nodded politely and walked away. Miguel's been working in this neighborhood for years. He knows who pays and who doesn't." "Mom's right," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger. "Miguel always smiles when he sees us. If he thought we didn't pay him, why would he be so nice?" Patricia's jaw tightened. "You people are delusional if you think one landscaper's opinion matters." "It's not about one landscaper's opinion," Linda said calmly. "It's about the fact that you've built your entire power play on a foundation of lies, and lies have a way of collapsing." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," I said, feeling my confidence growing with each word, "that when people lie about others, it usually says more about the liar than the target. You want to tell everyone in the neighborhood that I don't pay my bills? Go ahead. But you might want to think about what people will wonder when they realize you've been spreading false stories." Patricia's face was starting to flush red. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" "I think I'm honest," I replied. "And I think most people can tell the difference between someone who's trying to solve a problem and someone who's trying to create one." "Mom," Sarah said quietly, "why is she doing this to us?" The question hung in the air, and I watched Patricia's expression shift as she realized how her behavior looked through the eyes of a child. But instead of showing any remorse, her face hardened further. "Because sometimes, sweetie, people need to learn lessons about how to behave in a community," Patricia said, directing her words at Sarah but clearly meaning them for me. "What lesson is that exactly?" Linda asked. "The lesson that neighbors should lie about each other? That people should try to destroy each other's relationships with service providers? What exactly are you teaching here, Patricia?" "I'm teaching that actions have consequences," Patricia said, but her voice was losing its earlier conviction. "You're absolutely right," I said. "Actions do have consequences, and your actions here today have consequences too." "Such as?" "Such as the fact that my daughter now knows exactly what kind of person you are," I said. "Such as the fact that Linda here has witnessed your threats and harassment. Such as the fact that you've just admitted, in front of witnesses, that you've been deliberately spreading false information about my family." Patricia's eyes darted between the three of us, and I could see her calculating, trying to figure out how to regain control of the situation. "And such as the fact," Sarah added unexpectedly, that I'm never going to forget how mean you were to my mom in our own house. The simple honesty in Sarah's voice seemed to hit Patricia harder than any of our arguments had. For a moment, she looked almost uncertain, but then her face closed off again. This conversation is pointless. Believe whatever you want to believe. It won't change anything. You know what, Patricia? I said. You're right. It won't change anything, because there was never anything to change. I pay my bills, I treat people fairly, and the people who actually know me understand that. Your lies can't change reality. Patricia stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her struggling with the fact that her intimidation tactics weren't working. We'll see about that, she said finally, but the words lacked the venom they'd carried earlier. Yes, Linda said quietly. We will.